Hello, everybody, and welcome to our excellent session on organic gardening tips and tricks. That is one of the last of our Organic Week webinar series. We welcome you to the 14th annual year of Organic Week being celebrated across the country. This is one of our final webinars. We thought we would leave you with an excellent overview of what you need to know in order to incorporate organic into your life, whether you are living rurally or living in an urban environment. And I'd like to just start off by acknowledging that we're doing this event live from Ottawa. It is the unceded and unsurrendered territory of the Anishinaabe and Algonquin peoples. And of course, we'd just like to do a little shout out, of course, to our sponsors who make this entire activities across the country possible. So a shout out to Savour, Inno Foods, Yorkshire Valley, and Lancet. And today we are going to be welcoming a dynamic duo, a father-son combo. We have got Mark Cullen joining us. He has been in broadcasting and writing about his gardening experiences since the 1980s. He has written 24 books in total, including 2 biographies. Escape to Reality is his most recent book, and we will be giving away 5 copies of the book to participants of today's webinar. It is a joint publication with his son, which is wonderful. And his son is Ben, and he'll get his bio read next. But just to really highlight that Mark is quite a champion out there. He was awarded the Order of Canada for his connections with everyday Canadians through his gardening and environmental messages. He is the volunteer chair of the Highway to Heroes tree campaign and Trees for Life and Trees for Heroes. Escape to Reality, it's his book, and it's really just to figure out a non-how-to gardening book. I have a copy of it myself. It's absolutely wonderful. And of course, they work together in their writing for Toronto Star, a weekly column, and of course is well known down in Southern Ontario for all of their expertise as well. So Ben is going to join us. He's a 4th generation gardener. He earned his diploma in agriculture at the University of Guelph on the Ridgetown campus and a Bachelor of Commerce from Dalhousie in Halifax. He spent several years working in the food industry before traveling across Europe, Russia, Mongolia, and China on his own, and then has been joined his father, Mark, in the business 2 years ago. And he is a new father. So we've got a little one in the background as well. Just to also highlight that Ben is the founder and owner of Cullen Foods, which is specializing in certified organic Canadian grown pulses. And he lives in Guelph with his wife, Sam, and his son, Peter, and his dog, Ruby. So the Escape to Reality book, which we'll be giving away today, is the first joint publication that he's written with his father, and likely not his last. I also want to point out that Ben is the president of the Organic Council of Ontario, and this is the year that the Organic Council of Ontario is taking over running the Guelph Organic Conference, which is happening at the end of January. If you have not been before, I highly recommend it. It's excellent for local gardeners, consumers, anybody interested in learning more about organic. So, and just a final shout out to all of our sponsors that we wouldn't be able to do this without, just to really highlight how exciting it is to bring together the industry to continue to educate about organic. So without further ado, I'd like to pass it over to Ben and Mark.
Good morning. Thank you, Tia, for the warm welcome. And yes, for also promoting the Guelph Organic Conference, which is coming out of hiatus under the purview of the Organic Council of Ontario. Couldn't be more excited about that. But welcome, Dad.
Hey, Ben, it's good to join you here in the Canadian Organic Growers during Organic Week in Canada. Here we are. I think more active than ever. And more committed to organic growing than ever as well. Of the 23 books that we've written, or at least I've written, and you and I wrote this last one together, which was an awful lot of fun, Ben. There was a book in my past called The Canadian Organic Gardener. And I've been committed to organic gardening since our very firstborn came into this world, and I looked at the chemicals I had in my garden shed, and I said to myself, this is nuts. I got a brand new baby that we're responsible for, and I've got all these killing things out there. I got to get rid of this stuff. So I gave it all to my dad, and I don't know what he did with it. I assume he used it, But it's an old story, Ben. It was 38 years ago,
Yeah.
because your sister Lynn is 38 years old, and that's that's my background in organic gardening. Can I mention one other thing too, Ben? You know Lorraine Johnson.
Yes. Very
Lorraine
well.
Johnson and I are old friends. Before you were even born, I wrote a book with her called The Real Dirt, and it's a book about composting, which became part of the curriculum at Olds College, where they actually have a certificate course, a full credit course in composting. And it may be the only one of its kind in Canada. I'm just not sure, but the people of Alberta are blessed with a wonderful composting course. And I doubt if they're still, yeah, really, not everybody gets that.
Not everybody gets that. Well, you have some credibility, and that's your origin story, which is a good one. And I think consideration for youth and the future is what motivates a lot of people to organics. You know, what I've come to appreciate, having become an organic entrepreneur in the food business and having grown up, obviously, under your influence, is some of the differences between organic gardening at home and the organic foods that you buy at the grocery store. We're going to talk about some of the differences in the very last third of this conversation. But what I really appreciate about organic gardening, with all due respect to our certifying bodies, is as an organic gardener, you don't have to pay EcoCert to come out and audit your chemical shed and do a mass balance of your produce and account for every zucchini by lot code to ensure that it is in fact organic. You can just garden organically. This is something you can do. So I really appreciate that about organic gardening. Tell me about your organic gardening season so far.
By the way, and I'll do that, but I'm just listening to you and thinking, you know, I never really fully appreciated the fact that I don't have the organic police showing up at my door checking out my zucchinis. But they are more than welcome anytime. And if they had a look in my garden shed, and by the way, I have 3 of them, if they did an audit of my garden sheds, I don't think they'd be too surprised by anything that they found there. And right now, I'd be happy to give them a bucket of tomatoes, because I have a tsunami of organic tomatoes, which brings me to your question. What's going on in my garden right now? Is that what you were asking?
Yes, yes.
Oh my, the tomatoes are unbelievable. Now, little background, Mary, my wife, and I moved here exactly a year ago. And we have about a little over half an acre of gardening. We live on an acre, but we have about half an acre of garden. About half of the garden is a pollinator garden. The other half is a food garden, all organic. The food consists of vegetables, permanent food plants like asparagus and strawberries, raspberries. I have a 16-tree orchard at the back that I'm going to cordon, and I'm having a lot of fun with this, Ben. So right now, tomatoes, tomatoes, tomatoes. Tomatoes are the story, but I'm also harvesting beans. I'm harvesting, get this, wasabi. Have you ever had wasabi fresh from the garden?
No, I understand it's not easy to grow, or is it?
It is easier than stink.
Really?
To grow. Absolutely. It's unbelievable. And it grows better than lettuce, because lettuce wants to bolt all the time, and lettuce goes bitter after a while. Well, wasabi's not bitter. How would you describe it? Super hot?
Yeah, it's like a horseradish.
Yeah. It's horseradish. And by the way, the leaves, maybe there's a root there that I should be using to make wasabi. For those of you that like Japanese food, you might know, but the leaves. So come on out to my garden with me. I'll pick you a leaf. You can munch down on it, and then you can run inside and have a glass of water.
Yeah, thanks.
No, wasabi, organic wasabi. So far, I haven't seen any insects on it, although when I let it bloom, I do get plenty of pollinators that are busy there. And what else would you like to know?
What's the flower look like?
The flower is like a white buttercup, but smaller than a buttercup, in clusters.
Oh, okay.
In clusters, if I really let it, and I've cut it back 3 times, I need to cut it back again. It's very aggressive. You know what it's a lot like? Basil. If you've grown basil, you can grow wasabi. Loves the sun, loves it dry, likes it dry. You can't let it get completely dry. But and it's yeah, it grows quickly. Once the heat hits home in June, it just grew like crazy.
Well, I love the promotion of these crops that are less common here, because eating habits have changed faster than gardening habits in some ways. And
Yeah.
if it's one more thing you can replace or grow more locally, then why the heck not? But
Yeah.
before we get too carried away, we're talking about new gardens. You have a new garden. I have a new garden. You've been on quite a journey with your soil preparation, getting it how you want it. So, can you explain what you were dealing with when you moved in and the process you've been through? Specifically what
Uh,
worked, but maybe what didn't too, to get you
yeah.
to a very successful year two.
Well, yeah, absolutely. Thanks for asking, because it's a journey that it's a story I think I need to share, because a lot of Canadians live in the clay belt. I live in Markham. I know in Southern Ontario, there's tons of clay all over the place. And thank you, glaciers. You happen to dump a lot of clay here. You dump some beautiful topsoil down in Southwestern Ontario. They can grow anything. Squeeze a tomato, it grows. Here, clay, 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 clay. You can make great breakfast bowls and coffee cups with this stuff.
Bricks.
Bricks. Oh, you could really make great bricks. So what I did was, when I moved here, I called my friends at Miller Compost, and they compost most, maybe all of the leaves that get collected in Toronto and the GTA for that matter, and they compost them down. They do this on a massive scale, and it's a great place if you need good, like big quantities of compost. So I contacted them, and I bought 120 cubic yards of compost, which is really, really stupid. That's how, first of all, who brings that much compost onto their property? And
Yeah.
and like, I'll never pay for it, but it's not about the economics, right, Ben? It's about the experience.
Oh, when you're an organic gardener, there's a distinction between there's a distinction between farmers and gardeners. Anyway,
Kind of
continue.
like the same reason you went into the bean business, just to have some fun, not to make any money, right?
Well, so far that's true.
Yeah.
Well, besides the point,
And believe
continue.
me, folks, this guy's having fun. If you can have fun with beans, this boy's having fun. So I brought in all this compost, and you know what I did? I just put it on top of the clay. Well, that was so dumb. It didn't work. And I'll tell you why it didn't work. It didn't work because the water percolated through the compost. It found the clay, and it sat there. It just sat
Mhm.
there. And
Yeah.
so I planted in it, and the roots of everything I planted rotted, just rotted. This was last year before we moved into the house. I planted a garden, which is kind
Yeah.
of nuts too, right? Well,
Yeah.
so what I did, on recommendation of a professional that knows more about these things than me, is I hired a post hole digger. So this is not just a little rinky dink thing that I went out. I got a skid steer loader with a 2-foot wide post hole digger, and I got him to drill through the compost into the clay 3 feet down. So he goes down, up, shake the drill. 2 feet over, down, up, shake the drill. So what he's doing is he's incorporating clay into the compost. And here's the thing I've learned about clay, Ben. Clay is actually nutrient rich. The nutrients that are in clay are locked there because of the very small soil particles that clay is made up of, which makes clay clay, why it makes great bricks. It's really dense. So to make it less dense, I did this thing with a Ben. The results are unbelievable. I have a garden I am very proud of, and everything grew after I planted in that combination of clay and pure compost.
There you go. There you go. And I think well, as we get into it, we hear more and more about regenerative this, regenerative that. And one of the key, I guess, tenets is minimizing soil disturbance. However, we're talking about a brand new garden here where you got to get the thing going, right?
Yeah.
And now have plants that can actually put down roots, that can actually move moisture up and down through the soil profiles and horizons. The structure is just going to improve over time, but you have to set yourself up for success in the first place. It's the same reason why farmers tile their fields, right? For drainage. You can't, you got to get it right to begin with, and then over time, you can improve it kind of more incrementally. So yeah, it's a great story because I think, I drive through all these subdivisions because it's actually not so much the glaciers dumping clay, it's scraping away the topsoil, right? And the same in so many new subdivisions that you see with these bulldozers and earth movers, just like glaciers, moving away the topsoil. And then the builders never come and put it back.
No, they pretend to. You notice
Yeah.
they get it all built and then they put something on there that looks a bit like dirt. And then they spread it around and then they put sod on it. But it's not actually full of living organisms. I'm quite certain of that. I don't know where they get that stuff.
Well, it's pretty ugly. And so my point in mentioning that is you can live in a beautiful sand belt or fertile loam in southwestern Ontario in a newer subdivision, and you'll be dealing with the same problems because of the way that we build our communities, which is, a crime as far as I'm concerned. However, it is what it is. So I think that's what makes your story so relevant to people who are gardening in newer gardens.
Yeah, you're right. And by the way, can I just mention something about tillage radish?
Yes.
So for people joining us today in this seminar, just scribble this down. Tillage radish. I never even heard of it until the people at Miller Compost told me about it. And they said, Mark, next year, middle of July, sow these seeds. And they gave me a bag of tillage radish seeds. I had no idea what they're talking about. So I Googled it. And there's the information right there. It's evidently very common in the farming community, which is why you would know more about it than I do, Ben, because you kind of move in that circle. And so I did what they said. And that's a story that hasn't been completed yet. And we should talk again, maybe next spring or early summer. And I can report back to you about how effective the tillage radish has been at opening up the soil. You see, the tillage radish is a very aggressive root, right? Is that how it works?
That's exactly what it does.
And here's a question. Do I leave it in the ground or do I yank it out at some point?
I'd leave it in the ground. And I think a conventional farmer would likely go through, spray it down, but you can crimp it or you can just cut the tops off and then let those radishes decompose into the soil. And you'll have, the idea is they're so aggressive, they'll break through those soil pans, is what they call it, like a hard pan in the soil. And it'll break through and it'll just decompose there and give you just a nice column of drainage. And it'll improve the porosity kind of macro, which is the starting point to get micro porosity in the soil. It's all very good. So I'm excited to see where that goes.
Are there nutrients in the radishes themselves?
I'm not sure how much they would add. I mean, of course, they'd add some organic matter because they're going to pull carbon out of the air, which will decompose there. Beyond that, I'm not 100% sure, but I think it's not so much what you're doing for the nutrient addition; it's the structural difference it'll make to your soil. And I think by pulling them out, you could offset some of the benefits. So I would just cut the tops off, mow them down, whatever, and then let them decompose there, and that'll give you the effect that you're looking for.
When should I mow them down?
At maturity. Have you sown them yet?
They're far from mature. If you pull one out of the ground, and I did this morning, the radish itself is only 1.5 inches, 2 inches long, and it's quite small. But when I go online, I see these like massive Yugoslavian radishes that like they're like this, and I'm waiting for that to happen. But I think I might have to wait till next spring. No.
Yeah, and I don't think they're going to get that big. Now I would check. I don't have personal experience with this, to be clear, but I would check if it's an annual crop. You would just sow it now, and then it'll die off over the winter. You don't really have to do anything, right? Okay. So just leave it around, let it die over winter, and then garden around it next year. There'll be remnants, obviously, in the soil, but over time they'll break down.
All right, and I'm cutting all the flowers off as they occur.
Yeah, well, you don't want it to go to seed, and then you end up kind of with a weed on your hands, right?
Well, and it'll minimize the size of the radish itself, right? If I allow it to bloom.
Yeah. Likely so.
The pollinators like the blooms, I have to admit. So it hurts me to have to go.
It hurts you. It hurts you to cut your intelligence. Well, we don't want to hurt you.
Yeah, to the core.
So that's your soil story. I'll talk briefly about mine. I moved in late April, early May. So it's been a challenging gardening season for us. Now we moved back to Guelph into a 110-year-old house. So also kind of a heavy clay, but undisturbed. It's, not there. It's not a new subdivision. And so the house we moved into was occupied by a gardener for years who tended to it lovingly, and then sold the house to someone who was not a gardener, who lived there for 15 years and did nothing. So we have a lot of weed pressure, but I don't have to go to these great lengths that you do to build the soil, literally from the subsoil up. From the, say, ground up, that's not really good enough. You got to go below that. No, ours is really a top-down approach to getting this garden where we want it. And for me, that means converting lawn, because, as you know, I am no friend of the lawn any more than I have to have a lawn. So I've gone the cardboard method, and so far it's been very effective. Now our side yard is a bit embarrassing. It's a bit of a dog patch. It's the dog patch where the dog hangs out. And I have tried, and it's been futile. I can't tell you what I spent on strawberries, only to have Ruby the dog trample them, so that was no fun. So I've shifted my focus to the front yard, which is okay. It's not that deep, but it's 2 frontages wide, and I'm going about it with taking over the lawn. So I've got cardboard from my friends at the local bike shop, which is great. If you're looking for cardboard boxes, not for their volume, but just for the cardboard itself, these bike boxes are fabulous, because the bikes come over from wherever they're made, and these big kind of narrow flat boxes, and you fold out. It doesn't take a lot of bike boxes to get a lot of coverage. So lawn, then cardboard. And then in the area that I wanted to garden in this year, I put topsoil on top of the cardboard, and I watered it very thoroughly so that the cardboard would get saturated. And I poked holes in it.
How thick was the cardboard, and how thick was the compost?
Good question. So the cardboard is just one, regular stock cardboard layer thick, like a cardboard box, right? That's it. And I soaked it, and I used a pitchfork, and I poked a few drainage holes in it just so that I wouldn't get water collecting. And it's also important that you get uncoated cardboard. So no, you got to take all the tape off of it, take the staples out of it. And you don't want like a produce box that got that wax on it. It's got a raw cardboard. And I soaked it. I poked drainage holes in it. And there's a boulevard where I'm not ready to plant in yet. And for that side, I didn't put actually any compost or topsoil. I just put mulch. I put about 4 inches of mulch on top of that.
Because the mulch?
Natural bark mulch.
Okay.
And yeah, because the cardboard is already pretty high in carbon, much like wood. If I was to use wood chips, it would be not a great environment for a few years. We need to add nitrogen to it to make it a living soil or a working compost. So cardboard, and then wood bark mulch on the boulevard side, which I'm going to leave for a year. I'm going to let that break down over winter. And then on the house side of the sidewalk, I put 4 to 6 inches. I kind of, it's not an exact science, 4 to 6 inches of topsoil with compost. And then I put another 2 to 3 inches of mulch on top of that. And it started getting expensive. And I thought, okay, that's about enough for this year.
But you planted in that, right?
I've planted into that. And it's really important. An important step is just soaking the cardboard before it goes down, so that you can actually dig through it when you're planting, and get to the soil below, especially if you want to plant it in the first year. And that's how I converted a decent chunk, I would say most of our lawn in the front yard, to garden, chemical free. I didn't do a burn down. I didn't even cultivate. And that's the other thing, because these are mature soils that were tended to and fertilized by a past gardener. I didn't need to go in and cultivate and start new. That would have done, I think, more damage than good. By just smothering out what's there with the cardboard. This stage in the season, there's a bit of weeding, but as much of that weed pressure is coming from above as from below, which is to say, it's doing a good job of smothering what was there, which was mostly lawn. And I haven't had to disturb sort of the underlying soil structure. So that's been my method. So you see two contexts, right? Like a new garden. I call yours sort of like, it was sort of scorched earth. And then mine is sort of
a tennis court.
Garden.
Evidently 50 years ago, it was a tennis court.
Well, it's not easy. Not easy growing.
Don't try growing stuff on a tennis court, folks.
No.
By the way, can I ask you a question? So you're changing my gardening habits here, Ben. And, this is one of the wonderful things, folks, about working with one of your children is they tend to help you see the world differently. And I definitely see the world a lot differently, especially with regards to how I approach the methods of growing a garden. And tilling is something I used to always do. I own 2 rototillers. One I have in the back of a small tractor, and the other one is one of those little mantis tillers, that rattles your arms off. And Ben, you discourage the use of tillers. Why?
Well, it goes back to what we're hearing more about, and they call it regenerative, but the organic regenerative is, one step further still. And it's about appreciating the soil structure that's there and disturbing it as little as possible. Because what we know is that undisturbed soils will retain more carbon, which is a major benefit, obviously, to the climate, but also to the plants that grow there, which benefit from that organic matter. They also move moisture more effectively because they have these natural pathways for water to move. And you're going to end up with a lot less erosion because you have soil colloids that hold together better when they're not broken up. So if you have a heavy rain, you're going to lose a lot less of that topsoil to run off. There's so many benefits to just disturbing the soil as little as possible. And it is a new way of thinking. But there's all these innovative methods that don't require chemicals, because that is one of the concerns with regenerative. Broadly speaking, conventional regenerative agriculture can depend somewhat on herbicide to manage the weed pressure that you would otherwise manage through tillage. But that doesn't have to be the way. So that's why, organic regenerative is so important in understanding that distinction, because a lot of these herbicides, they can still kind of damage soils at a surface level. So so that's something that it's taken a few years to catch on, but we're seeing it in gardens, and we're seeing it more and more in agriculture too, where it used to be you had to cultivate to get your seed in the ground. Well, now you have these seed drills that it's like a minimum tillage, right? So less is better than more, and none is ideal. But of course, you have to plant, right? So when you're planting, you only disturb the soil as much as you have to get the seed or the transplant in the ground. And that's what seed drills do very effectively. So yeah, you can do it at home, you can do it on a farm, and that's definitely the way things are going for the better.
Yeah, I should say so. We're growing more food per acre than we used to, right?
Well, methods improve, and I think the challenge we face, which would surprise no one, is just the variability in weather patterns. And so, in aggregate, on average, yields, I think, continue to trend upwards, but there's been some pretty substantial weather events that can knock those averages back pretty hard, which is why, climate change needs to stay front and center in the conversation. Because even much as it's happening on a geological timescale, it seems the climate is changing faster than technology can keep up, and methods can keep up in some parts of the world. So we have to be mindful of that.
So Ben, notwithstanding weather issues, because none of us can predict precisely what that means, if we look at where we're heading in the world of agriculture, and especially sustainable and or organic growing, are we going to be able to grow enough food for future generations of people here on this earth?
I wouldn't trust anyone who has a definitive answer to a question that big. But I give you my perspective. And I think the answer is yes, no doubt. I mean, as it stands, we have a food surplus. the low-hanging fruit, no pun intended, as far as addressing a hungry global population is food waste. Which is why I lean towards dried and canned pulses, which store very well and don't spoil. But also, so dealing with the food waste issue is as important as dealing with the yield question. And then shifting how we eat is probably the follow-up to that, because I think people tend to rush towards an all or nothing solution, but there are certainly more sustainable methods of animal husbandry that can make the overall system more sustainable, but might actually have a lower output of protein, and that's okay because we overconsume meat proteins as it is. So
eat less meat, eat more beans. Is that what you're saying?
Eat less meat, eat better meat, more sustainable.
Eat better meat.
And a more varied diet of perennial crops and pulses and small grains. Yes, I mean, obviously eat more beans. I'm in the bean business, please. But I'm trying to give a pragmatic answer. It's hard though, because nobody really knows. At the end of the day, market forces, I guess, will determine that question.
Well, you and I have had an interesting experience in Detroit, where we see this massive city, which geographically, it's just an incredible footprint, bigger than Boston and Chicago and New York City combined. Like it's huge. And of course, It's been in decline. The population's been in decline for generations. And they're converting a lot of that space into urban agriculture. And as you know, I have a keen interest in what they're doing at Durham College in Ontario with regards to their Barrett Center of Sustainable Agriculture, urban agriculture. And I find myself thinking, I see hope here. What do you see?
Well, I see hope and possibility. I mean, the interesting thing about Detroit, of course, is it's also great ground. And it's no mistake that a lot of North America's largest cities sit on top of the best soils in the continent, right? Toronto as well. Great ground. So reclaiming as much of that as possible is superb. I think practically it's hard to feed an urban population on an urban footprint, but you can definitely add a meaningful supplementary supply of food that's fresh and nutritious. But I think the greatest benefit of urban agriculture, frankly, is the educational and the communal, call it the social benefits of growing that we both experienced that often, an urban population are just removed from. And so, even if you can't necessarily supply 100% of a community's needs in the immediate locale, any incremental benefit is a benefit. The greatest benefit beyond that food supply is reminding people how to eat seasonally, reminding people how things grow, giving them an appreciation for that firsthand. And then, there's mental health, physical health, community benefits of doing this together. And it's also just a far more sustainable thing to be doing with our public green spaces than mowing more lawn. So
okay, there's another dig on the lawn.
Another dig on lawn. So it's higher purpose for sure. I think it's great. Yeah, I think it's super, and I think it's part of elevating land use. Equally important to what we do with our rural properties as well, where we have thousands upon thousands of acres of monocrops. So so really good. I love what Barrett Center's doing. And it also gets to another social issue, which not a lot of people talk about, is the lack of diversity in food and farming in North America, where, our urban populations are more diverse, and it's not always an easy pathway from urban communities to rural agriculture communities without that bridge. And I can see urban agriculture serving a really useful social benefit in terms of bringing those communities, which you and I have both witnessed are often sometimes quite removed from each other, bringing them
Mhm.
together, and giving them a common purpose, common cause. So I love it. I think it's great.
I think that's a really great point. And I think it's really about engaging first generation immigrant families in the gardening / urban farming experience
Yes.
and learning from it, you and I learning from it.
Yeah. Well, everybody. Yes.
Yeah,
Because there's
everybody. They can learn from some things that we do. I mean, we've been gardening in Canada for 7 generations now, but what we can learn from them is immense.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yeah, it's great. It's great. So I don't want to get too carried away because you and I could talk all day here. 36, so we're kind of coming up on our conclusion here, but you did kind of write the book on Canadian organic gardening.
Yeah.
And before we sign off, I mean, there must have been a few key takeaways in your research and in your applied experience as a Canadian organic grower. If anybody listening, I assume everybody's dabbled, but hey, what can you share for a home gardener that's looking to go more organic at home?
Well, I've enjoyed reading about the growth in the knowledge about how the humankind is interconnected with nature, Ben. And one of my favorite books was about Alexander Humboldt, who lived 2 centuries ago and traveled the world and was the first to describe the natural world as a net, as a chain of interdependent living things, right? Insects, birds, mammals, plants, blah, blah, blah. That story about Alexander Humboldt helped me realize that what goes on in my garden is extremely profound. And I never appreciated that until, quite frankly, I started digging, if you don't mind the pun, I started digging into the idea of organic gardening versus the traditional forms of gardening I was brought up with, a father with a tool shed full of garden chemicals. And moving away from that was a journey of discovery that helped me appreciate that watching birds has its benefits. Encouraging insects to come to my garden, not to kill them when they arrive there, but rather to encourage them to stay, to habitate, to breed, and to build a composter and then remove the compost and put it in my garden. That whole process has helped me understand that humankind is not paramount. Humankind is merely an integrated part of the world of nature. And that is a very profound statement, and one that I've come to live by since I became an organic gardener 38 years ago. That's my answer.
Good answer. Good answer. It's been an awakening, it sounds like, and I couldn't agree more. I think what you're saying is, your actions in the garden go far beyond your property line because of the connectedness. And I think I agree with that. I would go not one step further, one step over. And I would say, in connection to what I've been doing with organic beans, is that the decisions you make in terms of what to eat have knock-on effects, because so much of our real estate, our land use, is committed to agriculture. And the types of foods that we buy, the types of foods that we consume have tremendous effect on the broader natural world, which for me is very compelling reason to go organic. But that's our piece for Organic Week.
That's right.
I know Tia's on the line here. She's going to jump on. She's going to wrap us up. But that been a nice conversation. Thank you.
Thank you. It's been fun.
So wonderful having you and having your expertise. And Mark, I mean, you've done an amazing job of breeding the next generation of organic, and now you have 2, Ben, with your beautiful little baby, I think, in the background there.
Thank you. Thankfully I was able to pass him off today, but we're having fun with Peter. I think he's already eaten his bushel of dirt that you're supposed to eat in your lifetime.
Maybe a couple.
He's like well into that.
Yours isn't dirt, it's beautiful compost and living earth.
Soil.
Right? Yeah.
Dirt is a 4-letter word, as we know, right?
Exactly. Well, again, I want to thank everybody for tuning in. And of course, you are welcome to send questions for Mark or Ben over to our info@organicweek website, and we will get back to you. So make sure that you're detailed in your questions, and we'll definitely give a response. And again, to thank Mark and Ben for 5 copies of this book, which they have written, and they are donating towards participants of today's webinar. So thanks again for everybody for participating, and happy Organic Week.
Thanks, Tia.
Thanks.